I've been teaching rhythm wrong for a very long time. And when I mean a very long time, I mean a very long time. So I have been teaching in a public school for 11 years, and each year I teach about 6 sections, 6 different classes of beginners, whether they're instrumentalists or vocalists. And in each of those classes, I start them out with learning how to read rhythm. I've also taught private guitar since high school. So all in all, I have taught a student or a group of students how to read rhythm from scratch over 200 times. And up until last week, I thought I had it. You know, I've been tweaking things every once in a while, but I thought I had it. And last week, I figured it out. I figured out how to teach rhythm. My overall goal is to have something like this and have students be able to perform this with intentionality without really having to think about it, without having to write anything down. So when I'm on the bandstand, the expectation is, you know, play this, make it sound good, make it feel good. Ba, ba, on whatever instrument. And last week, I was able to get beginners on the second day of instruction to be able to read this kind of rhythm perfectly. Everyone in the room. So I'm going to show you the secret sauce. But before that, I want to go through how I've taught rhythm in the past and then talk about some of the problems. So when I first started to teach rhythm, I started like this. So here's a whole note. It receives 4 beats. So I'm starting big picture, right? We have our whole note. We split that in half. We have 2 half notes. Each half note receives 2 beats. These are all of sound, right? We split that in half. We have our quarter note, 1 beat. 1 beats, oops. And then our 8th note, it's half a beat, and then our 16th note is a quarter of a beat. I call this the tree of notes. It's nice, it's symmetrical, it shows the mathematical relationship of, you know, note values. And we could substitute rest values in for this too. I'm assuming that you know kind of how to read rhythms a bit already, or you've taught this. So this makes sense. And if you're going to do a rhythm, a simple rhythm like this, it's easy to perform this rhythm if you understand how to count and if you understand some of your note values. So we're in a meter of 4, so we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. My count off is I give 2 clicks of the measure before, and then my students have to complete that count off. So I'll give this, and they have to say 3, 4. Normally I have them subdivide that beat, so I'll do this, and they say 3 and 4 and then they're in. So it's easy to see, you know, this gets 2 counts, and then that would be on 3 and that would be on 4. And if we're going to clap this, that's easy to do. 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, that's all well and good. And a lot of beginning, you know, band melodies and stuff use rhythms like this. But once we get into a rhythm like this, it's a little trickier. This kind of rhythm, you have to subdivide. Like that gets half of a beat. So then when does this occur? You have to write in counts. So I had students write in counts. And then they can visualize where things lie and then figure out what the 4 states of rhythm are. So a note can start, right? A note can start. A note can be held. A note can end, and then there could be periods of musical time without a note. So the start of a note, I call it the attack. When a note is holding, I call it the sustain. When a note stops, I call that release. And then a period of musical silence is a rest. So it's easy to see where the attacks, sustains, release, and rests are in this rhythm now that I've like kind of charted it out. But that's an extra step, and students are then reading this, and they're not reading this. They're reading their counts. It's a great way to be able to analyze a rhythm, but in context, it doesn't really help. So what I started to do is I started to use what I call sequencer notation, and in this form of notation, it shows all the subdivisions. It uses an X for an attack. It uses a line for a sustain. When that line ends, that's a release. And then when there is no box here, that's a rest. So this rhythm is this rhythm. And it's really easy to see. Anyone can perform this rhythm. On an X, you clap. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That's easy. There's no decoding involved. The problem with traditional standard notation is you have to decode the symbols to get to those 4 states of rhythm. So now, what is the solution here? I'm going to show you the solution. We start off, instead of starting large, we start off small. So these are all eighth notes, and we're going to be dealing with eighth note rhythms. You can use the same concept for eighth note triplet or for 16th note rhythms, but we start off with just eighth notes, and I want my students to be able to count and perform these and also track. Tracking is, following along with your eyes and making sure you know where you are and what that state of rhythm is. And then the next level then is to be able to look forward, look, later on to look for any trouble spots. So if I was having my students count and clap this, I would give them 1, 2, say 3 and 4 and then 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. It's really easy. Maybe write out 2 measures of just eighth notes and have them, count and clap that. You can also have them identify, okay, so what is this? This is the and of. Okay, beat 1, beat 2, 3, that's the and of 3. What is this? That's the and of 4. They need to be able to identify spots within their count. Now, what do you do from here? Since we can see all the subdivisions, now we can start removing subdivisions. So on beat 1, it used to be an attack, but now it's a rest. So if I see this, I'm going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And the key here is start with a basic concept and then do a lot of repetitions on it. So I have 10 different pages just for eighth note based rhythms of 4 measure lines where students can count and apply these things. They don't need to write in any counts. They're just going to start applying it. So let's do something else. Let's take another one away and let's count and clap this. 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That's really easy. When I start students off with this, maybe I'll point to the different counts here and I'll have them tell me or show me what the different state of rhythm is. So what is this? It's beat 1, it's a rest. Show me with your hands are apart. That's the end of 1, it's an attack. 2, attack, and a 2, attack, 3, attack, and a 3, attack, beat 4, it's another attack, and then the and, no, that's not an attack, that is a rest, and then beat 4, and a 4, that is an attack. So that's the key. So let's go through my sequence. So we start with just our eighth notes and eighth rests. The beauty of this is you can still see all of the subdivisions. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. This is a pretty complicated rhythm. If I was to write this out without showing all of, no one would ever write out these 3 eighth notes next to each other. If I was to write this out with a dotted quarter note, there is an extra layer of decoding that students need to do. So I don't want them to have to do that. I want them to get used to tracking and subdividing, feeling that beat. They can also pulse their hands by feeling that beat. So I'd go through, okay, what is this? It's a rest, show me with your hands. And of 1, that's an attack. 2, and of 2, 3, and of 3, 4, and of 4. 1, and of 1, 2, and of 2, 3, and of 3, 4, and of 4. And then I'm going to give them the count off. And the key is they are still tracking with their eyes on the different eighth note subdivisions. Nothing is hidden there. It's either on or off. Right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And I want to encourage my students to feel the beat with their feet. So have their foot tapping on the beat and then to feel and internalize that subdivision. Eventually, you don't want to have to use subdivision syllables 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Sometimes I'm hearing like a hi-hat in my head or a shaker or a drum groove, but I'm still feeling those separate pulses within the beat, that subdivision, so that I can lock this in and make a groove. Let's look at the next step here. And I still see all the subdivisions, but now I'm tying notes. So beat 2 is tied to the and of beat 2. What a tie does is it takes the second note, and instead of it being an attack, it then becomes a sustain. So I have 1 and 2 and I'm pulsing there. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And you can go through count by count and ask students, all right, this is beat 1. Tell me what it is. Is it an attack, sustain, release, arrest? What's that? That is a sustain and then another attack. I again have a whole sheet of just tied things, but we can get a little more complicated with it. Now I've put the tie in some tricky areas. So I have some syncopation here. If I was to write this out again using, a regular music notation, this would look really tricky with the, the eighth, quarter, eighth rhythm. But it's easy to see what the different states of rhythm are because I can see, again, all of those subdivisions. We're going to add in rests and ties. I still see everything. 1. Let's just read this. Try to read this by yourself. There's no decoding involved. Very easy to read this. Ready and go, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and very easy for students. Again, attack, sustain, release, and then rest. Now, what if we make it super complicated? We put in, syncopations all over the place. There's attacks on the ands without numbers before them. It's still very visually easy to see. This is as easy as that sequencer notation was, but it's just, we're just adding those attacks. We're just adding those rests, and we're adding those ties. Let's perform this rhythm. 3 and go, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You can break it down again, point to different parts of the measure, ask students, is this an attack, sustain, release, or rest? They're going to be able to tell you. They're going to be able to help you. This is easy to see until we get to the dreaded, the mystifying quarter note. This is normally where people start, but I feel like this is hard because this is contained in here, and it's difficult to track. It's difficult to track the subdivision if you have to decode the subdivision. If you're only doing non-syncopated quarter note rhythms, that's fine, but as soon as you're starting to add in this kind of stuff, this becomes difficult. If you are in compound meter, it's even worse. If you're going to transcribe rhythms and do some rhythmic dictations, it's also kind of a mess. So what I do is I show them that this is the same as this. It's 2/8 subdivisions tied together. I'm going to still feel it, and I'm still going to pulse my hand, and I have a whole page of just this kind of rhythm, just tied eighth notes going to quarter notes, just quarter note rhythms. So I can go, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and I'm thinking about this as 2/8. I'm not thinking about it as one beat because that's difficult when it is syncopated. So let's look at things if they're syncopated. This rhythm normally destroys beginning rhythm readers. But if you've been thinking about the subdivision, and if you can read this, then you could read this. But when you get here, you're thinking about it as 2/8 note subdivisions. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Just have to keep that going. Okay, so now the next step is add some more complexity. We have rests and we have those quarter note rhythms. But if you can think about this as 2, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, it's not difficult anymore. Now we have our quarter rest. Again, this is a basic thing that you would normally introduce far earlier into your rhythm reading sequence. But again, 2/8 rests equal a quarter rest. The problem is in tracking. The problem is in keeping, track of where you are within the measure and then where you are within the subdivision. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I'm thinking two things here. This is the same concept if you want to do 16th note or 8th note triplet rhythms. Now we have the dotted quarter note. Dotted quarter note is 3/8 notes. You see where this is going. We get here, you should be thinking about those 3 subdivisions. 3 and 4 and. Again, go through, make sure your students know, okay, what happens on, what is this? They say 1, and they show me with their hands. What's that? That's and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And again, the key is to make sure that you're doing lots of reps and you're checking across the classroom and you're making sure that students are feeling that subdivision somewhere in their body. They're tapping their foot on that beat. You're helping them be successful in this. And then we get to a dotted quarter rest. And if you add dotted quarter rests, ties, and eighth rests, this is as syncopated as you can get. This is as difficult as you can get. But if you can see the subdivisions within there, and if you've practiced it by sight, there's no reason to ever write anything in. There's no reason to have to think about, okay, it's half of a beat, because that changes in compound meter. What is the beat? Now, if we're doing transcription, rhythmic dictation, this normally is very difficult for students. Hearing the sound and being able to get it out on paper. So let's say we have a rhythm. Here's my rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and we'll do it again. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, there's my rhythm. Now, I start out with the easy stuff. I start out with all of the notes and then figure out where those rests are. Remember, it was dun, 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 dun. Okay, and I don't need to count for this. I just need to be able to hear that eighth note somewhere in my head, find that bass subdivision, and then find the eighth note. Now, just figure out where that sustain was. There was a sustain right there. Dun, 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 dun. This is not how I would see this in the wild, though. Then you have to do, okay, so what receives 2/8 subdivisions? A quarter note receives 2/8 subdivisions. What receives 2/8 rest subdivisions? That is a quarter rest. So I've included links to 10 different Noteflight scores. Inside those scores are a bunch of different examples, and the examples get progressively harder within, whatever the scope of the score is. So this one is the first one. It's just eighth notes and rests. Do my count off. Have them say 3 and 4 and then come in 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you can have them do it as a group, have them do it individually. If there's a new concept, talk about that new concept, go through beat by beat. This will make your classroom a lot more efficient and effective for reading rhythms. It will empower your students to be able to think independently, to own the music that they play. They won't have to rely on the first chair player in their row anymore. They'll be able to read the music and have fun sounding good.